Hey folks, I'm Connor, and this is Netrunner 101. Welcome to our first episode, Introduction to Corporations. As I said in the first video that I did, this will not be covering data pack reviews or a actual learn to play of the game. So if you've never played Netrunner, I suggest going and checking out one of the great tutorials that are out there on YouTube, and play a game or two, and then come back to these. You'll get a lot more. We got a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump in pretty quickly here. But first thing I want to say is, if you played your first game of Netrunner and you found yourself thumbing through the rules for a long period of time, and it's taking you a couple hours to play a game, don't panic. In the immortal words of Douglas Adams, don't panic. We're going to cover all this stuff, you're going to get through it, and you're going to see that all of it makes sense. It's complex, but it's doable. Alright, so we're going to start with corporations. And the first thing you need to know is whether or not to mulligan. I get this question all the time from new players. You've drawn your first hand, you look at those cards, and you have no idea whether or not you're supposed to be keeping them. As a very, very broad generalization, I'm going to say that what you want to start with is at least 2 pieces of ice and a hedge fund. Why? So that you can get some economy going, a little bit of cash, and to ice up your central servers, HQ and R&D. Beyond that, what you also want to look for is not a lot of agendas. You don't generally want more than one agenda in your hand, preferably maybe even none. Let's talk a little bit about servers. You've got HQ, R&D, and archives. HQ is your hand, R&D is your deck, and archives is your discard pile. Those 3 central servers always exist in the game. Whether or not they have ice, whether or not they have cards in them, they all always exist. The only thing you can do to modify those servers is to add upgrades. And when you do, you'll play an upgrade behind either the ID card, behind your draw pile, or behind your discard. Either way, it's important to note that an asset or an agenda can never go in those spots. Never put that down there. That's a huge mistake, and a lot of new players make that. They're not quite sure of the differences between assets and upgrades. Only upgrades go into your central servers. Okay? So, beyond that, let's talk about remote servers. Now, remote servers, similar to your centrals, can have upgrades. As long as you're obeying card text that refers to other specific limitations, you can have as many upgrades in a particular server as you want. Remote servers don't exist until you put down a card to create the server. It can be a piece of ice, it can be an asset, an agenda, an upgrade, doesn't matter. As long as a card exists, the server exists. So, and vice versa. So if you take out all cards in a server, it ceases to exist. You can't have multiple assets or multiple agendas in a server. You also cannot have an asset and an agenda in a server. That's important to note. Only one or the other. So a card could be an asset, and then you might install an upgrade on top of it. That's fine. Fine to have an asset and 2 upgrades or 3 upgrades. Okay? Important to note here, and this is really important for new players playing on the corp side, and I see people do this all the time. Don't trail your cards behind to indicate an upgrade. You know, the way the play space is set up on the table, it's going to be obvious on your centrals where there's an upgrade. It'll be behind the ID. So a lot of players assume immediately that if you're doing that with an upgrade in a remote server, you want to do the same thing. But no, you don't want to do that. You want to control information. You want to hide things from the runner, and you want to make them guess or work for the information. So when you install into a server, simply put the card face down, right where it's supposed to go, and then put any other cards right on top. Do not let the runner know what you're doing. Maybe you installed an asset first, or maybe you installed an upgrade. Maybe later you're installing an asset if you installed an upgrade first. Let him figure that out. That's information he needs to work for. Okay, next I want to talk about 2 little symbols that are on the timing charts in the rulebook that a lot of players on both sides gloss over or misunderstand. And I personally think they're even more important for the corporation. One is a tiny little green circular arrow, and that is the paid abilities window. And the other is the little sort of blue star-shaped symbol, and that is the window for resing non-ice cards. So I'm going to use Pad Campaign as an example. Pad Campaign is the 2-cost neutral corp card where you're going to res it, and then it says when at the beginning of your turn, take 1 credit. So as an example, let's say the court player on his turn plays that card after his 3rd click. A lot of new players will immediately res that. You pay the 2 cost, and you've got that card. When will that trigger? It will trigger at the beginning of the court's next turn. But that's a bad play, and these trigger windows are exactly why. So let me back up. So when you install that card and it's face down, you don't have to immediately res. And resing also does not cost a click. Some new players get a little confused on that one. Resing does not cost a click. It's these little non-res or non-ice res windows that you get that are going to allow you to do this without spending a click. So when you install that face down, the runner doesn't know what it is. It might be an agenda. He doesn't know. In either case, when you res it, you have to pay the money, that 2 cost. So what you're not getting out of it is an immediate return, because it won't fire until after the runner's turn and it comes back to the court. So instead what you want to do is you want to leave that face down until the beginning of your next turn. Now at the beginning, if you look on the timing chart, right there at the top of the timing chart, it's going to say that there's a little paid ability window, and then there's going to be a non-ice cards resing window. And that's when you're going to res it. You're going to res that over. And then the very next thing on the turn chart is it talks about when your turn begins. All of those triggers fire. So at that point, you've spent 2 for the pad campaign, and then immediately the pad campaign fires. Now you're only down 1 credit, and you've given up as little information to the runner as possible. Occasionally, as the corporation, you're going to want to trash a piece of ice. There's a number of reasons this may happen, but regardless, you need to follow a very simple and concrete procedure for doing so. First, install the new piece of ice. It's always going to be the outermost piece of ice, that is, the ice furthest away from the server. The innermost piece of ice is the one nearest the server, and that sequence never changes. It's always innermost to outermost, no matter how many pieces of ice you have. Once you've installed the outermost piece of ice, you can choose to trash any of the other ice you've installed. 1, 2, 3, doesn't matter. Trash as many as you want. If they're resed, they go into the archives face up. If they're not resed, they go into the archives face down. Once the ice that you want to trash have been removed, the ice that you've installed then slides down to the innermost available position. All the ice sort of sandwiches in and the empty spaces are removed. Once all of those have been filled out, you then pay the cost from that new piece of ice's position. So if it is now the 2nd piece of ice, you would pay 1 credit. Does that make sense? That's all we're going to cover now for ice. We're going to have a full segment later on the different types of ice, strategies for deck building, when you would want to res a piece of ice and when you would not, all that sort of thing. For now, we'll leave it there. So that's our introduction to corporations. I hope you found this useful. Please put any questions you have down in the comments section, and if you enjoyed this and got some value out of it, I hope you subscribe and give us a like. I will be jumping into the runners, introduction to runners next, so I hope you join us in that segment. Cheers. We want your soul.